There are moments that change everything. They don't come out of the blue. They don't sound like fanfare. They come quietly. Like a box left on your doorstep. It was an ordinary Tuesday. I was coming home later than usual, staying late at the office, finishing up a project for a client who would end up choosing someone else anyway. I was angry at myself, at the city, at the world. At the boredom. At the perpetual feeling that the days were wasting away. As I walked up the porch, I immediately noticed the box. It was lying on the top step. Small. Cardboard. Old. So old it looked like it had been there since the beginning of time, I just hadn't noticed it before. It's got my name on it. Clear, bold, black marker. No return address. No postal or courier signs. No stickers. Just Eric. I looked over my shoulder. An empty street. The pale light of street lamps. Someone had left her, and walked away. And somehow, that was the scariest thing of all. I stood in front of the door for a long time, holding the box like it might explode. Then I finally took a breath, opened the door and went inside. I set the box on the table in the hallway. For about 5 minutes I just stared at it. My hands itched to open it, but somewhere in my chest sat an anxiety, an annoying, almost physical anxiety. Anxiety without reason is the most insidious. I ripped off the tape. The lid came off easily. Inside was an old leather journal. And an envelope. The smell hit my nose, dust, old books, time. The kind of smell only found in things that hold other people's secrets. I picked up the envelope. It was thin. Only a few words on it. This is the truth you need to know. My heart plummeted. Harold. My grandfather. I hadn't seen that signature in 10 years. Not since we buried him in the old cemetery outside of town. Grave with a white cross. A U.S. flag on the casket. Men in uniform saluting. A hero. A man of legend. I always believed in those legends. Grandpa Harold was everything I wanted to be. Honorable, steadfast, kind. A man who'd been through war, but never hardened. Who lost friends, but didn't lose his soul. He taught me simple things, respect, the power of words, honor. And now there's a box. A letter. And a diary. Something inside me whispered. You're not ready. But I had already ripped open the envelope. Inside was a short note. If you're reading this, it's time. You deserve to know the truth. But remember, knowledge doesn't give you power. It gives burdens. Harold. I read it 3 times. Each time the word sounded heavier and heavier. I sat down at the kitchen table. I picked up my journal. It was shabby, the pages yellowed. The little lock was broken. It was as if someone had tried to close it, but changed their mind. On the first page, neat, strict handwriting. I never thought anyone would find out about that night. I didn't plan to tell it. But old age makes the truth unbearable. I'm tired of carrying it alone. I ran my fingers over the line. It trembled like a breath before a confession. I began to read. First, the usual entries. About youth. About the war. About how he met my grandmother at a dance in 1947. I smiled, recognizing familiar stories. Almost relaxed. Almost. Then I noticed the dates were getting shorter. The lines got shorter. Handwriting more nervous. 1973. A small town in the mountains. I shouldn't have fought with him. I shouldn't have drank that night. I shouldn't have pushed him. My heart pounded faster. I read on. He took a bad fall. I saw the blood. I tried to stop it. But it was too late. I set the journal on the table. My mind felt empty. I closed my eyes. The image of my grandfather stood before me. A veteran. A volunteer. Family pride. And now blood. Sin. Secrecy. I opened the diary again. I could have gone to the police. But I had a son. A wife. I chose family. The pages crackled under my fingers. I buried him behind the old barn, where no one would think to look. Everyone assumed he'd run away, that he'd abandoned his family. I leaned back in my chair. The world around me seemed to shift. The house I'd grown up in, the stories I'd been fed. Was everything a lie? Or life? I sat for a long time, staring at the diary like a snake. There were more pages. More truth. More weight. I could close it. Put it back in the box. Forget it. But I knew, I had already crossed the line. I was already on the other side. And there was no turning back. I took the journal in both hands. And I kept reading. Every word was like a stab in the heart. Each line was like losing a part of myself. And somewhere in the back of my mind, there was a whisper. Now you know. Now you are a host. I sat at the table in the empty kitchen, with the diary lying in front of me like a tiny bomb someone had forgotten to defuse. The light above the table swayed in the breeze outside the window, casting trembling shadows on the pages. I opened the journal again, cautiously, as if it might bite. The pages were old, with the yellow patina of time, and smelled like a mixture of dust, leather, and something sour, a smell that seemed to come from deep within the past itself. The first entry was almost innocent, stories of youth, of serving in the army, of loving my grandmother Mary. I read about how they met in a small cafe, how Harold carried oranges to the hospital for her when she broke her leg. He wrote with warmth. With light. And for a moment, I almost forgot why I'd opened this journal in the first place. But then, somewhere around page 30, the style changed. The words became shorter. Sharper. The lines began to break like broken branches. 1973, May. Tom and I had too much to drink. He brought up Mary again. Offensively. I told him to shut up. He wouldn't shut up. I hit him. Once. Another. Then, he fell down. Never got up. I read those lines over and over again. I couldn't believe my grandfather was writing this, the same one who taught me to fish, who told me tales of honor and justice. How could he? I turned the page. I waited. A minute. 10. Then I realized he wasn't breathing. Panic paralyzed me. I thought, if I confess, I'll lose everything. Mary. My family. My future. I dragged his body behind the barn. The ground there was soft from the rain. I dug with my bare hands. By the time I finished, the sun was setting. I stood there, covered in mud, and prayed. Praying that no one would ever know. I closed the journal, clutching it to my chest. My heart was pounding so loud I thought the whole house would hear it. What should I do now? Destroy the image? Destroy the memory that my whole family holds on to? I got up and started pacing around the kitchen like a caged animal. I felt nauseous. The next day I took the journal with me to work. Put it in my bag like a jewelry or a bomb. Every time someone walked past my desk, I thought they could hear the diary whispering through their skin. He's a murderer. He's no hero. At lunch, I sat in my car, reading on. 3 days passed. No one had come forward. Tom was considered a grown man. No one was surprised he disappeared. His wife cried. I was at her side. I comforted her, for crying out loud. And no one figured it out. I dropped my head on the steering wheel. The world I lived in was cracking, breaking, crumbling like a house of cards. Harold wasn't who I thought he was. And maybe I wasn't who I thought I was anymore either. That evening, I sat down to dinner with my parents. The usual Sunday dinner, roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans. My father told me how my grandfather once caught a fish the size of my little sister in the lake. I looked at him and heard only echoes from the diary. I dug with my hands. I prayed. Dad, I asked suddenly. Did you ever doubt Grandpa? I mean, that he's, wasn't perfect. Dad looked up from his plate. Everyone makes mistakes, he said. But Harold was the best man I ever knew. I didn't say more. I just nodded. Because if I did, the truth would start seeping through the cracks. And I wasn't ready to see their world cracked. At night, I couldn't sleep. I turned the pages of the diary over and over in my mind. I saw Harold standing over Tom's body. Digging with his hands. Praying. And it wasn't him that scared me. It was me. What would I do? Would I turn in my grandfather? Destroy my own family? Or would I do the same thing, bury the truth under a layer of beautiful stories? At 3 in the morning, I opened the diary again. There was only one sentence on the last page. If anyone is reading this, forgive me. And I cried. Not for him. For myself. Because I knew. Forgiveness is not something you can get through writing. And it's not something I can give him. I carried the diary around with me like a curse, like a secret that couldn't be thrown away or kept close. At work, I put it at the bottom of my backpack, afraid that someone would accidentally see it. At home, I hid it under my bed, among boxes of old school notebooks. I knew that if someone else found this diary, everything would be ruined. Not just my image of my grandfather. The whole family. Our whole family, which was built on pride in a man who, it turns out, once chose to kill. In the evenings, I caught myself doing strange things. Staring at Harold's framed photo in the living room for long periods of time. His smile, confident, kind, victorious. There was still a sign on a street in my town that said, Gerald Avenue. My father was always proud as he passed by. When I was 10, he said. One day people will say to you, are you Harold Reed's grandson? And you'll be able to nod proudly. Now that thought was burning me up inside. One of those nights, I sat down to dinner with my parents again. Mom was serving meat pie. Dad was pouring himself some tea. Do you remember when Harold took you fishing? Father suddenly asked. You were just a boy then. I nodded. I remembered. I remembered him patiently showing me how to cast the rod. How he praised me for my patience, even when I messed up the line. My father smiled, leaning back in his chair thoughtfully. You know, he said. There aren't many real people in the world. You know, he said, there aren't many real people in the world. Harold was one of them. The best of all of us. I looked at him, and something inside me clenched. The best of us. The one who buried his neighbor's body behind the barn. I wanted to scream. Smash the plate against the wall. To tell everything. But instead I put my head down and ate on, feeling the food turn to dust in my mouth. The next day, I couldn't take it anymore. I went there. To the old barn. It stood on an abandoned lot outside the city limits, all shabby and warped from time. The grass rose above my knees, the doors creaking in the wind. I walked around the barn slowly, listening, as if the air itself could tell me the truth. It was empty inside. Spiders, old boards, the smell of rot. But beyond the barn, beyond the tiny stone wall, I saw a patch of land that seemed to be different. Too flat. Too right. I stood there for a long time, hands hooked into the strap of the bag that held the small shovel. I had brought it unknowingly. Part of me already knew I would want to dig. I took a step forward. And another. I bent down. I touched the ground with my fingers. Soft. Pliable. I knew the moment I put the shovel in, everything would change. No turning back. I closed my eyes. And I heard my own voice in my head. Will you choose the truth, or will you choose your family? I dropped the shovel. And I walked away. I just turned around and walked across the grass without turning around. Let the truth stay here. Beneath the layers of years and earth. Let this place always be quiet. But the silence didn't come to me. That night I read the diary again. In a later entry, Harold wrote. Sometimes I think the real sin is not murder. It's that I smile at her every day. That I teach my kids how to fish. That I may have become a better person, only because I buried the worst in me forever. I stared at those lines and felt something inside break. Harold wasn't making excuses. He wasn't looking for forgiveness. He just lived with it. Quietly. Quietly. For the rest of his life. The next day, I went to the town library. I picked up the May 1973 paper. There was a small notice. Missing Thomas Blake. 37 years old. Last seen in a bar on the outskirts of town. Police believe he may have left the state voluntarily. No investigation. No search for a body. Just silence. I realized the whole town had already chose silence. Because sometimes it's easier to live with the unknown than to face it. In the evening I sat at the kitchen table again. On the wall hung a picture, Harold, smiling at a picnic. Next to it, my grandmother. Next to it, my father, still a boy. Everybody's happy. Everyone believing in that picture. And I get it. I have no right to destroy their faith. Even if I can't believe in it anymore. And somewhere deep in my chest, beneath the layer of fear, guilt, and love, I heard a small, quiet voice. Silence is also a choice. And I chose. The next morning, I couldn't just lie back into the routine of life. Something inside me demanded action. I took a couple of days off. I lied to my boss about having a migraine. Actually, it was the truth. So I decided to dig. Not the ground, the past. I started with the archives. The city library smelled of dust and forgotten paper. The old woman at the front desk looked at me with lazy interest. Missing persons from the 70s? She repeated my query. There were several cases. And who exactly are you looking for? Tom Blake, I answered. Her face twitched for a moment. I noticed it. A small, almost imperceptible gesture as if she'd remembered something better forgotten. There's something in the newspaper files. Over there, third row from the left. I found an article from 1973. Local resident Thomas Blake disappeared without a trace. Could have left the state. He was last seen at the Old Pine Bar having a drink with a few friends. Then another. Police believe Tom Blake was involved in a debt scam. Escape is being considered as the primary theory. Escape. Fraud. It's a nice cover. It's a convenient theory. No mention of the quarrel. No mention of Harold. I started asking around to old-timers. Under the guise of researching the town's history, I went into the bar that was then the site of the Old Pine. It was now a dreary pub with shabby posters on the walls and the smell of cheap beer. The bartender, a man in his 50s, was lazily wiping glasses. Tom Blake. He repeated. Yes, there was something, a long time ago. Disappeared, sort of. But, you know, guys like him wouldn't do any good around here. What makes you think that? I asked. He shrugged his shoulders. A lot of debt. A lot of enemies. Those don't last in a small town. Or disappear. I walked outside, feeling my heart pounding in my throat. Everyone knew. But no one was talking. I decided to walk back to the old barn. It was raining a fine, prickly rain. The barn stood like a charred skeleton with the doors slamming in the wind. I walked around the other side of it. The ground was heaving in one place, where I noticed the unevenness. I knelt down. I touched the ground. And suddenly I realized. If I dug down now, I'd see something I couldn't forget. I wouldn't be able to pretend. I couldn't keep quiet. I sat down on the dirty ground. And I thought, what would Harold do if he were me? The answer came instantly. He would have buried it deeper. But I wasn't Harold. I was a man who had grown up with his examples. A man who believed in honesty. A man who now sat in the middle of an abandoned lot with his arms around his head, unsure of who he had become. In the evening, I leafed through the diary again. Page after page. And on one, almost at the very end, I found an entry that stopped my breath. If I could change everything, I would choose not to strike first. But when the fist is already flying, it's too late to think about the future. Not striking first. What if Tom really was a threat? What if a fight was inevitable? Or was it just an excuse? A last-ditch attempt to hide behind circumstances? I realized I'd never know the whole truth. I would never know who was right and who was wrong. Who was a monster. And who was just a man who made a mistake. Late one night, I was sitting in my apartment. On the table was a printout of a map of the city. I had marked a barn with an X. And next to it, I wrote, Tom Blake. I knew I could say anything. Go to the police. Make a fuss. Destroy the memory that held lives on me. But I also knew differently. Sometimes the truth doesn't bring justice. Only pain. And as I looked at that map, at the little cross on the edge of town, I felt for the first time in a long time, I don't want to be a destroyer. Even if I'm right. The next day, I bought a box. A sturdy one with a lock. I put the diary in it. Printouts. Photos. I closed it. Locked it. And put it on the farthest shelf in the pantry. I chose not to forget. But I also chose not to tell. And maybe that was heroism, too. Only different. It's been 3 days. 3 endless days. Days where I went to work, smiled at my coworkers, ate lunch alone, listened to reports at meetings, and it was like someone else's dream. All the time I was thinking about one thing. One box. One mystery. One wrong move. Everything around me continued to live according to the old laws. The street with Harold's name on it was still decorated with flags for the anniversary of his feat. The newspapers again printed laudatory articles about the generation of heroes. I read them and my insides clenched. I knew the truth. And I kept silent. One evening I went to the countryside. I took the box with the diary. In the trunk was a small campfire I'd bought for camping, once upon a time, in that former, naive life. I drove for a long time. Until the asphalt turned to gravel. Until the gravel became mud. Until the road ended altogether. There, among the gloomy pines, I stopped. I made a fire. The fire burned slowly, licking the paper and wood ravenously. I took out the diary. I ran my finger over its ragged cover. Inhaled the smell of old leather, tobacco, and something else. The smell of the past. I opened the diary at random. A page. There, in scrawled handwriting, was written. If anyone reading this, know this, I wasn't a perfect person. But I was human. I closed my eyes. And threw the journal into the fire. The pages burst into flames almost silently. Letters, words, confessions all rose into the air as black smoke. I watched the last link to the truth melt away. And felt. Nothing. Not relief. No guilt. Just emptiness. When the fire died down, I stayed sitting by the smoldering embers. The silence around me was so thick I felt like I could touch it. And suddenly I realized. I hadn't destroyed the truth. I had made it a part of me. I was now its guardian. And its grave. The next day I went to my parents' house. They greeted me with their usual warmth. My father talked about little things, how he had fixed the fence, how the neighbor had bought a new car. Mom brought tea and cake. I sat at the table, the very table where they taught me honesty, respect, kindness. And I was silent. On the wall hung a large photograph. Grandpa Harold. In a military uniform. Smiling. I stared at it for a long time. And I wondered, who was he really? A hero? A killer? A victim of circumstance? There were no answers. And there never would be. Later, my father, in a noncommittal tone of voice, said. You know, Eric. If it wasn't for Harold, our family would never be what it is. He gave us a name. Honor. A path. I nodded. Yeah, Dad. I know. But I knew a lot more than he did. And I carried that knowledge inside me like a quiet, dark fire that would never go out. A few weeks passed. Life moved on. But sometimes, as I walk down Harold Street, I notice my steps slowing down. I look at the sign. And there's something aching in my chest. Sometimes I have a dream. I'm back in the abandoned field by the barn. There's a boy standing there. He looks like me. And his grandfather. He's digging in the ground. And suddenly he finds a diary. And he looks at me. And he asks me. Why didn't you do anything? I wake up in a cold sweat. I chose to preserve the illusion. I chose not to destroy a house that had been built over generations. But sometimes I ask myself one question. Was this house real? Or has it been standing on bones all this time? I chose family over truth. I chose peace over justice. I chose silence over screaming. Sometimes that makes you a savior. Sometimes it makes you an accomplice. And only you know who you've really become.